Welcome to Coffee Compliance and Chuckleheads. I'm Eric Rubenstein. I'm Sean Weiss. I am so How did that happen? We're blowing your mind today.
I love it. I love it.
Well, we hope everybody's doing awesome. We are back for another live episode, and we are grateful for each and every single one of you that is joining in with us today live. Eric, Jordan, how are you guys doing?
And I feel left out. If I go shave my head tomorrow, we're close to like a pool game. We do cue ball, and we can just put numbers on our head, and we're good to go. I'm there. But no, things are good. I think I don't understand this. The whole country's burning up. It's hot. Some places are getting rain. It's a little crazy right now. But one thing's constant. Still, flying sucks. That's it.
So, Eric, you were at the NAMPI. I think you're on mute, Eric.
Uh-oh. He ghosted.
There we go. No,
this shows you how out of practice we are, and people are signing off already because
I'm having some issues. But let's not remember that although you and I have our head shaved, Jordan still looks like the guy from the Wonder Bar here in New Jersey.
I love it. Oh,
yeah, I'm getting over a cold. I was at NAMPI. Caught myself a cold while I was at NAMPI.
Okay.
Those who
don't know what it is, why don't you tell them?
Yeah, National Association of Medicaid Program Integrity. It's all people who have a vested interest in Medicaid program integrity. So fraud, waste, abuse. A lot of data analytics companies are there. A lot of consulting companies are there. I went there kind of with a couple of different hats through my company, through the university where I teach. So I was there, sat in on some of the presentations, met with a lot of people, listened to a lot of data analytics companies talking. I know we're going to talk a lot about data analytics, and I was just telling you guys before we went on air, I wrote an article I think it's going to be in the December HCCA Today magazine on the provider that just got sentenced out of Georgia. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit. That one's really sticking in my craw. And I've really come to the conclusion that data analytics are just failing us, and I've had it. That's it.
Are you going to be offering to autograph your articles for people?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I had a trial a bunch of years ago, and I was an OIG agent. And after
you
the
were
trials,
an OIG agent?
I know it's odd to. I know it's an OIG agent. Yeah,
he's got the t-shirt. He's got the t-shirt.
I got t-shirt. There was a defense attorney who it was the best. There was a defense attorney who wound up being on the cover of some defense magazine, and she actually went around the U.S. Attorney's office putting signed copies in all the prosecutors' offices who had kicked her asses over the years.
Outstanding.
Great.
All right, so let's get after it, because we really do have a jam-packed agenda today, and we have so much information that we really need to be able to get through. Why don't we start, Jordan? You want to start, and let's talk about the HR bill that has passed, and it is tied to the COVID-19 for 2021 and beyond. And let's dive into this.
So yeah, the bill is HR 4040 is the bill, the Advancing Telehealth Beyond COVID Act of 2021. The sponsor on this bill was Representative Liz Cheney, and so far the bill's been introduced. It's passed in the House, and it's we can track the progression. But really, what's in this bill, and I don't know. I think, again, given all that we've seen in fraud, waste, and abuse, it's going to be interesting to see how some of this moves forward. But obviously, removing those geographic requirements and expanding the originating sites for telehealth services, expanding the practitioners, eligible to furnish these telehealth services, and then extending telehealth services for federally qualified health centers. Then there's also a part of extending telehealth services for federally qualified health centers, and then delaying the in-person requirements under Medicare for mental health services. I just find the timing interesting because just today we see where they've pretty much relaxed the COVID requirements and the mandates and things like that as far as vaccination and meetings in public and all that stuff. So, if this goes on and pushes through, I don't know. Section 6 of this was allowing the furnishing and of audio only. I think it's good, but also in this 2 years, we've proven there's been no shortage of fraud and messing with the system. So, guys, this goes through the end of 2024. So the damage we've done in a year and a half or 2 years, it's like, do we want to go another 2 years? And it kind of baffles me. I think there's got to be, well, like what else, what other puppet strings are being puppeteered around here?
Eric, what are your thoughts?
Well, how are they going to address the issue? So, like, everything involving telemedicine is all good and well, but how are they addressing the issue regarding, even though the 1135 waivers, how are they going to address the issue of the state licensure or registration requirements? Is that doesn't change anything. Like, it's all good and well, but so that's at least from a delivery perspective, right? Like, that's a concern from that perspective. But as we're going to talk about a little bit later, the data analytics have got to catch up with all of the stuff that's going on with not just really COVID, but with the telefraud and the telemedicine. I mean, it's just getting to a point of absurdity where the amount of hubris that the providers that are engaged in these fraudulent activities are going to. We're not talking about the waste and abuse. Like, I think we need to always characterize that, people that are in the waste and abuse, they misinterpret a guideline, they're using a modifier incorrectly, it's triggering a waste. That's not what's criminal. You got to pay the piper back when you mess up, right? There's no question, whether it be an overpayment or something like that. We're talking about the fraudulent, but man, this pay and chase system that we're going through has gotten to a point of really just, the analytics have failed us.
Well, yeah, I don't disagree with you. We have so many different programs out there. The CERT, right? Comprehensive error rate testing. We have the racks that do data mining, and they do automated and they do manual reviews. We have the UPICs who conduct investigations using data analytics. We have, on the commercial side, special investigative units that are using pure data analytics. We have the OIG, your old stomping grounds, using data analytics. I think to a certain, I guess maybe here's my question to you. Is it that the data analytics have failed us, or is it that we have not done a good enough job of educating the investigatory bodies, the auditors, and even the practices on how to interpret their data, I mean,
well,
think of, and my final point to you is this, right? Take any EMR system, and within an EMR system, you can run 200 to 250 reports, but nobody knows what those reports are. So isn't that where the systemic failure is? It's not maybe that the data is not failing us. It's that we have been failed by the people at the EMRs, by the people at the artificial intelligence organizations or the augmented intelligence organizations on helping us to better define and understand what the data actually is and what it says. I mean, I'm just putting it out.
Yeah, I mean, are we just bombarded by so much data that we don't know really what's even relational, what it really means, how to apply it, where to go with it, what to do with it, and maybe that's it because there's just so much data running fast at everybody, and maybe I think that's probably a big part of it. I also think, to your point, that we failed to let people know just how easy it is for some to look at this data and figure out where the discrepancies are. And to Eric's point, I think this is the peak frustration point. And maybe as some of these audits occur, part of these audits are identifying some of that education and where these gaps are. I mean, I don't know the answer, but it seems that way to me.
Well, I'll play a little bit of a devil's advocate because I think that, where you're talking about, Sean, is potentially from not the fraud perspective, right? You're talking about like the data analytics analytics from like utilization management, revenue cycle, all of that. Where I'm saying that data analytics has failed us is, so let's talk about this Georgia case, right? So this nurse practitioner from Georgia just recently got sentenced. I believe it was 87 months, $3 million in billings, $1.6 million in restitution, over 3,000 orders for orthotics. Now, what I haven't been able to find online anywhere is what the time period is. There's nothing in the press releases that tell you the time period. She was found guilty after a 2-day trial. So first of all, a 2-day trial tells me that
Pretty
the
quick.
facts were pretty, yeah, I mean, you guys have both known this, and Sean, you've testified, more than, there's probably only 1 or 2 people I know that have been in the courtroom and in ALJs more than you, but you know this. A 2-day trial means that the fact pattern is pretty definitive, and which makes me wonder, what are you going to trial for if on a 2-day trial? But for over 3,000 orders for orthotics, patients who are amputees, patients who are dead, I mean, fabricated records to support the orthotic, which then leads me to believe, so a couple things. One, if she's fabricated records for the orthotic, did she bill for an E&M, right?
Right.
Or is she
That's
just
a
doing it to
great point.
justify it? Because if she billed for an E&M, then the sort of the parlayed question is geospacing and geofencing. If you've billed for an E&M via telemedicine, my first question is always going to be, what was so special about you, nurse practitioner in Conyers, Georgia, that triggered you being the only person on the planet to be able to do a virtual E&M, a telemedicine E&M, for someone who needed a knee brace? So the data failed us there, right?
I got you. I'm with you.
If there's and likely there's no E&M, because a lot of these telephone companies, there's no E&M.
Yeah, because they're more interested in just billing for the DME because they're getting the kickback.
That's right. So let's say there's no E&M because they want to try to hide that piece of the puzzle. So now you're talking about your first interaction with the patient is the ordering of a piece of DME, no prior patient relationship whatsoever. Now, granted, there is a carve out, right, as part of the PHE for a new patient E&M that you don't need to do that. But if we're not talking about an E&M and we're strictly talking about a piece of DME being ordered, if it's a back brace, a knee brace, an L or a K, HCPCS, but why is that not raising a flag like immediately? Why isn't that auto denying when you've got no prior relationship, no E&M, none of that? Those are the things that, like, say, analytics have failed us there.
So I'm with you. I'm with you, right? So I think the problem there is, and again, I'm spitballing here. I don't know that the problem is the analytics as much as it is the failure of the system to create the edits that need to be in place using algorithms to say, if there's no evaluation and management service to establish the physician-patient relationship and you are billed for a supply, then the claim has to auto deny and there has to be an additional documentation request that's submitted.
I agree.
So,
100%. But I think you and I are talking about the same thing.
I'm using
the term as analytics.
Yeah.
You guys are using the term as edits. We're absolutely
I'm with. Yeah, and to y'all's point, if you dumb this down all the way, what Sean's saying is it's almost an if-then statement. Like,
that's right.
It's the most basic if-then statement in Excel. If this didn't occur, then this should occur. And like, if that's the most basic function, truly, just even in Excel, why can't we do that at a hierarchical higher level? I don't understand. That's the gap. I agree. I think that's the easy blanket fail.
That's the problem.
Here's what I'll say.
The problem lies.
Yeah. So here's what I'll say. I know we have insurance folks that are listening to our podcast because I get comments all the time from them. If you all would like to clean up your systems and get things done correctly, you got 3 guys right here that are willing, capable, and able to help explain what kind of if, ands, or thuses need to be put in place. So we're already getting some comments. Let's see. let's see what we got going on here. So this is the first comment. Without knowing the dates of service, I'm guessing because CMS did not audit encounters that were via telemedicine during COVID when they allowed virtual services with all the special allowances.
Yeah, but see, the problem with that is that so we're going under a presumption that people are doing this the legitimate way. The legitimate way is visit with the provider, identification of the problem, ordering of the orthotic, whether that order is after an
Right.
x-ray or whatever. We're talking in terms of what people that are in the legitimate world are doing. So these are illegitimate claims, right? We already know that. This defendant was convicted after trial. It's after a plea, so it has been adjudicated, but the crime has been committed. It's no longer alleged. So we're
Yep.
talking about not the wasted abuse where someone may have been, off in a documentation and it's kind of a knew or should have known. We're talking about the intent. So the problem that I have inherently, and look, where I am, we have a data analytics tool, and we're constantly working to update it. We meet on a monthly basis with our developers, and one of the things that we do is I look at the press releases like I do and publish out on LinkedIn, and I say, are we targeting in our analytics these things, right? And I use my meetings with our developers. The circus doesn't change. It's just the clowns. Look at these telefraud schemes. They're all the same. No prior relationship with the patient and the provider beforehand. The very first time that they have that diagnosis is during the ordering of that item, service, or procedure, and then it goes from there. So, this provider, so this is the things that really just kind of got me on this one was
Yep.
3,000 plus orders for orthotics. This is not something, it's a 2-day trial. It could have been just during the PHE. It could have been maybe a little bit beforehand. We're not
Doesn't
talking
matter.
about, right? So 3,000 plus from a nurse practitioner, not an orthopedist, right? Not a neurologist. Maybe I'm going to give you a back brace to help with some of this. We're
I
talking
mean,
about
we
a
sit
nurse
back.
practitioner.
Yeah, we sit back and we think about this, and you know, in my mind, right? So I think I'm a pretty simple guy, right? I I like to look at things in the at the foundational level. If I am a nurse practitioner, okay, and nothing against nurse practitioners, nothing against PAs, but if I am a nurse practitioner and I am writing excessive amounts of prescriptions for durable medical equipment, which we already know DME is a high value target of the government because of the amount of fraud that exists in that space. I have to be thinking to myself, geez, maybe I should lighten the number of prescriptions that I'm writing here. I mean, to Pam's point. Yeah, go ahead, Eric, please.
I'll say, but again, what we're doing is we're the rational people. We're the same people in an insane world, right? So we're talking about what would be considered the rational response if we were doing things like utilization management reports or something. I will bet you anything that if you were to ask this practitioner during her inmate visit on Sundays, if you were to ask her how many of these, until you got charged, how many of these orders did you write? I will bet you that she has no conceptual idea how many. I had a case with a doc who was doing this, and I think I had talked about this doctor. He was clicking so many before he did an electronic. He had to do it by paper. He was forwarding the orders to a local like big box office supply store and having them printed out in volume. He had no idea how many of these he was writing. He had no idea for whom he just
Right.
didn't know what he did know for sure was when he was getting shortchanged. He knew for sure how
Right.
much he was getting shortchanged.
Right.
But I think that's the problem is that we're coming up with all these rationalizations about you know, what you should be doing. Hey, I've written a lot of these. Maybe I should be taking a look and thinking about it. That's not where we're talking about. I think that we've gotten to a point where, I'm at this conference, there's 3 or 4, maybe 5 different data analytics companies. They all have these amazing tools. They all have these big flat screens with all their graphical interfaces. And it's, as I like to say, in the article I use this term, and I know I've used it with you, the Rube Goldberg. building a better mousetrap. And I think that, each time you try to create these new data models, what you're doing is you're sometimes forgetting the forest and the trees, right?
Yes.
So, like, why is it that a concern wasn't raised over 3,000 plus? And I don't know what the number is. It's sort of like when we talk about the impossible day. I had somebody call me the other day and say, Eric, what do you think an impossible day is? And I go, I don't know. Is this person working 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.? Is 12 hours an impossible day? Is 16 hours an impossible day? I don't know what the number is, but I certainly know it when I see it, right? It's like you don't know what fraud is, but I certainly know it when I see it. To see 3,000, but then to see these instances where you've got people who are amputees. So that's a diagnosis. When you have an amputation of a limb or anything along those lines, that is a diagnosis code that is ascribed to an item, service, or procedure that attaches to that. It's in your record. If a DME, if a provider is looking to write you for a knee brace, the HCPCS code has to have the modifier LT, RT, left or right. If you are a left leg amputee above the knee, there's an ICD-10 for that. Left amputation above the knee. Now, if in 6 months someone writes me an order for a left knee orthotic, that should deny. I don't have that limb, right? I don't have that limb. So that's, to me, like that's a basic failure of the data analytics.
And look at this. Thank you for finding this, Joanne. It ranged from 2018, so just over a year. This chucklehead wrote more than 3,000 prescriptions, and it was funny. As you were going through that, I was reading the Justice Department's release on it, and it said, Shirley, whatever her name is, let greed take the wheel, and it made me think of the Carrie Underwood song, Jesus Take the Wheel.
Take the wheel.
But this makes it even more angering because it's two things. It's before the PHE, so you've got two factors there. One, these couldn't have even been telemedicine visits, so there's not going to be an E&M. So that answers our first question. We're kind of giving this woman the benefit of the doubt, so that's done. Number one. Number two, the thing that now really torques me up even more is the fact that we're talking about a 1 year period, 3,000 orthotics. I'm now going to get out my calculator because now, assuming that she didn't, 365 days a year. If she wrote 3,000 of these divided by 365 days a year, she wrote an average of 8.2 a day if she didn't take any days off.
Yeah, if she didn't take any days off, so on a 5-day work week, I mean, that's what I'm thinking is the amount of egregiousness. So when they said greed took the wheel, no, what happened was she thought she found a loophole and she went for immediate exploitation.
Yeah. So
and again, I think to y'all's point, that's why the trial took 2 days. That's it.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I'm shocked at her counsel not advising her to try to get a plea agreement out of it.
Well, as you know, Sean, people say I'm going to the mat because remember they only got to convince one person, not 12. They'd rather have a
That's right. That's right. Because it's beyond a reasonable doubt, and you have to have. Right. That's right. So I love this comment, from Pam, about a patient calling her and saying that she got multiple calls this week about a back brace her doctor ordered. The caller had a foreign accent. The practices in rural Tennessee, and all employees have an expected draw. The patient asked if this was spam. So I want to go to. I love our audience, man. We get some good stuff. Do
you guys like spam? By the way,
only if it's fried.
Fried.
Yeah, you got to do it in a cast iron skillet. So you got to put some a tablespoon of oil in there. Yeah. And people wonder why I got stents in my heart.
I'm not a fan of the spam burger hamburger. So it's got to be fried.
As they say, don't knock it till you spam it. All right. So
Scrapple.
No, I don't eat scrapple. No, if you knew what was in scrapple, you wouldn't even use the word.
I have no idea.
So I want to go back to that, right? So I posted today. I posted today on LinkedIn. I did a blog about providers who are moonlighting. Okay. And they're trying to make some extra revenue and, whatever it is, after hours. Well, first, providers have a responsibility to understand who they're crawling into the sack with. Okay. If you don't do some initial research, and I tell people all the time, get on to Dr. Google and you should have no problem figuring this out. Okay. Look up the name of the recruiter that's trying to contract with you. Ask them, who are the companies that I will be working for? And that way you can go and look at the Better Business Bureau to make a determination as to whether or not there's any complaints filed against them. You can take a look and see if there's been any actions brought against them by the Office of Inspector General, or if they've been, previously convicted by the Department of Justice, or if there was a settlement agreement. I mean, doing research today is not like it was when we were kids, Eric. Now, Jordan's a lot younger than us, but like when you and I were kids,
don't give me that Dewey Decimal System. Come on, man.
Listen, no, but it's the truth. When we were kids, we used to have to go to the card catalog. We used to have to thumb through that to figure out, where the books were. And
well, for those of you from the New York area, the New York City Yellow Pages.
That's right. I mean, remember we didn't have computers. We had microfiche, right? Everything was on microfiche film. But so where was I? Oh, before the wheels came off the bus. So what I was talking about is the fact that providers have a responsibility to do their diligence to see who it is that they're actually climbing into the bed with. And if you don't, you can't claim that you were ignorant. There's no deliberate ignorance. There's no reckless, these are the things that the government's coming after you for: deliberate ignorance, reckless disregard, and knowingly. As some of you may not know this, but you may know it after reading my post today. I am an independent reviewer. I'm an investigator, if you will, for a number of medical boards across the country. And one of the things that I have an opportunity to do is to review very specific files that have been escalated or referred to the medical boards by various special investigative units, by the government, to take a look at the facts in the case, and then to opine on those that have not already been escalated to an IMAC or an to the OIG or to wherever it needs to go. And I make recommendations based on what I see from a fact pattern. I've had a couple of cases just this week. They were probably next to this nurse practitioner that we're talking about. And I can't, obviously, because of confidentiality, I can't go into some of the specifics. But I will tell you, we're talking like $500,000 that one of these providers, in just a matter of months, had billed for durable medical equipment for patients that they had no physician-patient relationship with. There were no reviews of any films. There were no face-to-face encounters with the patients. Folks, that's not substandard medical services. That's fraud. That is something that requires a referral to the Office of Inspector General for further evaluation and investigation. Eric, you're a former guy with a badge. You're a retired guy with a badge. I mean, do those type of situations not rise to the level of egregiousness to where they need to have a referral to the government?
They do. So, the problem has kind of inherently been that the way that the system is set up, that some of these medical boards don't have connections or inroads or contacts. And so, they treat them from a licensure perspective when they really should be treating them as a criminal referral for fraud, or at least, something to U.S. Attorney's Office. And that's always been the case. That, we were just talking about that, is setting up a process that doesn't exist. And it really is a state by state process. And if you don't have an OIG office in your state, so Office of Investigations is not in every state.
That's
They
right.
used to be. During the early days of Operation Restore Trust, that was part of the original plan, was that every state was going to have an office of at least 2 agents. But that wound up being financially unfeasible. A state like Montana, which had an office where they were doing, a handful of cases a year, it wasn't supportive. So they closed a lot of cases and then regionalized it. But if you're in a state like North Dakota or Montana, where there's no OIG office, for example, and you've got something, and sometimes you just don't know who to contact. That's the biggest problem I think that exists, is that as good as the OIG is in passing along its message to the public, everybody still thinks that the OIG is the FBI, right? Everybody thinks that everybody's the FBI, which is another story entirely. But that's really part of the problem, is that things go to medical boards that are really predicated on some sort of a fraud, and the medical board oftentimes doesn't have a Sean Weiss on their side helping them to understand this and look at it from a fraud perspective, right? Because the medical boards are typically made up of licensees of the organization. It's peer to peer, which is why oftentimes we don't see the level of scrutiny that we should, because nobody wants to rat on themselves, right? So it's often a challenge. Why is it that a provider who removes the wrong lung from a cancer patient doesn't lose their license and get prosecuted for something? It becomes a suspension or something because it's regulatory. So yeah, it's I think that's it's a huge problem, is that there aren't people who have that kind of independent ability to vet things and look at where they should go.
So while we're on the subject of fraud, and we're doing really good on time, because I really want to make sure, Eric, we leave a lot of time to talk about self audits. But I want to go over to Jordan for a minute, right? And I will say this. You crush it with your posts on LinkedIn with regard to PE and the impact, good, bad, or indifferent. I think everybody has their lane, right? And your lane is obviously data, and it's understanding relational data. It's understanding how to have high level intelligent conversations. It's understanding how to make the numbers sing, right? Not just words on a paper, but making them come to life. And I mean that with the utmost sincerity. I'd say that whether you were my friend or not, it's the truth. PE, okay? And one of the points that you've made, and I agree with you. PE can work. It can work in healthcare. But I want you to fill in. But
the wheels have fallen off. So no, I mean, I think the hardest part we're seeing right now, but it's really the agenda, and it's people get caught up in the middle. So I put a post up there, I guess last week. There have been a lot of people that have gotten laid off over the past probably 2 to 3 weeks, and we're getting indicators right now that there should be an announcement of layoffs from several large companies that we all know tomorrow. And this is tough because I think it's unnecessary. It's due to lack of planning. It's kind of like that greed thing we just talked about. The problem is a lot of people don't see the opposite end, and I do. So a lot of these people that get laid off, I communicate with those people and they talk. And when they say, hey, we had to sign paperwork where we can't even talk about it. Thanks for being our voice. I wish I could say something. Guys, that's extremely disturbing to me, because at the end of the day, these guys are just caught up in it. They're not making the big money, the exit money. And this isn't going to stop until probably the middle of next year is what we think with the financial indicators. And it's made our system even more broken, even less efficient, less trustworthy, both by the patient, both by us that work in this. I mean, Eric and Sean, myself, and almost everybody on that's listening, we were here before all this stuff started. We'll be here long after all these people, sunset for their 2 to 3 year run. And, I think we we've lost accountability and we've lost the ability to be transparent. And to Sean's point, the data is extremely clear. I mean, when we're looking at companies that are taking 60, 70, 80, 90 million dollars in funding and only to less than a year later lay off 400 people. I mean, that's tough.
And one of the points that I think you've made, and Eric, I want your thoughts on this as well as a retired law enforcement person. We look at Thanos, right? And we look at Elizabeth Holmes. And one of the comments that Jordan made is, how is what's going on right now any different than what happened with Thanos? And I agree with Jordan on that. But from a law enforcement perspective, and this is the part that I really want you to opine on. I think the biggest issue that I have, the thing that I take most exception with PE companies, okay? And again, I have nothing against PE if they do it right. But what I have a problem with is PE organizations believing that the way they conduct themselves and do business in other industries can translate to how you do business in healthcare without realizing that we have a 27-headed monster called regulatory compliance.
Yeah. It's interesting that really the take home of what you just said is, when a private equity company that's big in banking, right, mergers and acquisitions in let's say the financial industry, dives into health IT, and they don't know anything about health IT, and oftentimes you hear these comparisons about financial fraud, waste, and abuse to health fraud, waste, and abuse, right? Because there's some similarities in whatever algorithms and anomalies and things. But I think that when you take a company that's really big in the private equity world of something like financial IT or manufacturing or something, and you bring them into the world of healthcare and think that that's going to work, I think that's where you get these issues. I think that the companies that are the P companies that do healthcare, that stay in the healthcare lane, are probably the ones that do the best job because they understand the landscape, they understand that interplay. And really what happens is, when a company, when the Jordan Johnson private equity firm comes in and buys the Sean Weiss healthcare firm, and Jordan Johnson's private equity is all healthcare, they're buying Sean Weiss because they want to create a complementary, right? What do they call it? The verticals, right?
The vertical.
They're not looking, right. So they're not looking to create this diversity that gets them from one sector to another to another. I mean, the Theranos, when you look at the Theranos, most of the people that were investing had no idea what was going on, right? These are people that had no idea. They knew nothing about nothing when it came to healthcare. What they saw was a lot of magic, right? They saw sleight of hand. They saw a lot of smoke and mirrors. They saw nothing that was really discernible. If people were involved that had a really keen healthcare eye, then the right people would have been in the right room who would have challenged things the right way. It's a little bit like when you're picking a jury. Why is it that Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani were tried on essentially the same charges? Why is it that he's found guilty of everything and she's found guilty of only a few things? And jury selection is both art and science. How is it any different?
I'm so glad that you said that. Tomorrow, on the final episode this week of The Compliance Guy, I have on Colin Callahan, who is a former prosecutor in the Western District of Pennsylvania, out of Pittsburgh. And that is one of the things that we are talking about on the podcast, is the art of the voir dire, the art of jury selection. Yep. And I got to tell you, tomorrow, if you get an opportunity to listen to this episode, it is all about the Ruan case and Dr. Khan, the difference between these two. He and I break down the entire Supreme Court ruling, from the majority opinion from Justice Breyer, and then the conferring opinion as well that was written by Justice, I think it's Alito. But anyways, I want to, and the last thing I'll leave you with, I still believe that when her sentence is handed down, and I think it's coming up soon, isn't it? September, October?
Yeah,
Elizabeth
but there's
Holmes?
going to be yeah,
Yes.
it'll be stayed pending appeal, or even if she gets a sentence, they'll stay her surrender date pending
No, no,
appeal
no,
or
no.
something.
I
So,
agree. I
but
agree. But
yeah,
if they sentence her, which is supposed to be happening either September or October, I am still of the firm belief that she's going to get no more than 3 years. My guess is going to be right around 2 years.
yep, I'm not in disagreement. I'm
Yeah.
not. I'm not.
All
I'm
right.
not in disagreement.
All right. Now, let's get into the self audit because this is such a critical conversation. I want you to kind of spearhead this one, Eric, please. Talk about the critical importance of self audit process and why.
So the very first thing is to have the level set that we're not talking about people who are engaging in fraud. People who are engaging in fraud are not doing self audits because they do not care, right? They do not care. It's that's just not what the self audit process is about. OIG model compliance guidance has as one of the 7 known bullet points, right? We know the 8th is the risk mitigation, but is self audit. I have always been a firm believer that self audits should not be self audits; they should be third party audits. You should have a third party come in who's going to give you an objective response on the review of those records, and not a self audit done by someone who's on your payroll, who's really got a quasi fiduciary interest in making sure that it goes right. Because who are you going to have do it? You've got the billing manager is going to do it for her employee or his employee, or vice versa. Someone, if it's not right, someone's going to make an issue. So self audits are an important piece of the puzzle because, so first and foremost, OIG model compliance guidelines suggest it, and the model compliance guidelines are there to help keep you from going afoul of things like the False Claims Act and such. But really, the most important part of the self audit process is because, as a Medicare participating provider, as part of you completing and signing off on your 855 form and joining the program, you agree that when you identify an overpayment, you will make that overpayment within 60 days, or really, if we fall into the ACA, it's this 8 month. But it makes you a good corporate citizen. It keeps you off the radar for the government. It makes you compliant with rules and policies and regulations. But at the very least, you understand where your billings are, you understand where your documentation weaknesses are, and you really can plan ahead for the future to understand, if you have a problem, how do you fix it? That you should never be surprised if you've got an OIG subpoena, if you've got a subpoena for an investigation. It should be for something that you don't know about, because you know about most of the things that you're doing.
So, great explanation. One of the things that I really think people want to pay attention to the self auditing process for is for everything that you were talking about, but to avoid getting into a situation where you have civil monetary penalties. Okay. If and I'm going to go back to a recent OIG issue that you, Robert Lyles, and I had an opportunity to work on. And I always hate talking about when something doesn't turn out the way that we wanted it to, or we thought it should turn out, because I thought we had outstanding arguments. I mean, the fact that there was no national coverage determination, that they were relying on sub-regulatory guidance documents such as the LCD. There were variances in the LCDs from some of the MACs. But the OIG and the way that this doctor got targeted, at least we believe, is that they were part of a study that was being done by the Office of Inspector General, and they just happened to be one of the poor suckers that their number got called. And the data that the OSIG had, the data that OSIG had on this provider, demonstrated the fact that this was a pure liability situation. And the fact that it was a pure liability situation, you know, the government took the position of, hey, they had every opportunity to self-audit themselves, to identify the potential overpayment that existed, and to issue the actuals as a refund. But they didn't. And they got caught up in the process of the OIG. And you're lucky we're only asking for double damages when we could actually be asking for 3 times the amount.
It's
So
almost
to
like the argument of your failure to plan does not make my emergency, right? Like in
perfect.
this sense, if the provider had self-audited himself and identified this problem and made the overpayment, it would have just been an overpayment. Like your failure to plan, now we're trying to circle the wagons, we're rallying the troops for this. I mean, there's a lot of ways we could have looked at it. And I think that, at the end of the day, they didn't treat this provider similarly to others when CMS specifically put out guidance telling providers to self-audit themselves
That's right.
and make an overpayment. And because this guy got caught up in an OE&I study, he becomes he becomes the poster child for lack of a better term. But, this hits it on the head, right? Like self-audit is a way to stay off the radar, like I said. And this is exactly the example, right? And I could see OSIG never actually said this, but OSIG could have come back and said, hey, we put out guidance that tells you to self-audit yourself. If you had
That's right.
self-audited yourself a year before this study was done, or a year, whatever, 6 months before we contacted you, we would have been having a different conversation. So,
Sure.
I mean, it's like a rock and a hard place.
Yep. And I wanna put up Betty Hovey's comment, because this falls in line, Eric, with what you were saying. She went into a practice in the past that was in trouble and couldn't figure out why. She asked to perform their self audits, and they stated that their coder had done them. The same coder that had coded the work in the first place, and she gave herself 100%. I mean,
Yeah.
to your point, Eric, self audit doesn't mean self audit internally. It doesn't mean that the same person who's doing your coding and billing should be auditing their work. You got to have an independent, objective third party, a second set of eyes, taking a closer look at what is going on.
Yeah, a lot of our oncology practices, they'll do this once a year would be best. They do it once every 3 years. It's part of their internal compliance plan. They have it documented. And to your point, that's what they want, is that third party, and it's budgeted in. I mean, part of the compliance, part of their budget. It's just, they know that every year, every 3 years, it's going to hit, and that's just part of it.
Yeah. And here's the thing, Eric, I think you would agree. Irrespective, you're either going to pay a little bit up front, or you're going to pay a whole lot on the back end.
That's the conversation. I mean, I love my colloquialisms. Lately are getting more and more. But it's like to be a penny wise, pound foolish, step over a dime to look for a quarter that doesn't exist. I remember, one of the
No,
about 3 years
tripping
ago.
over dollars to pick up dimes.
There you go, there you go. But the issue of budgeting, like, so Jordan, you're hitting it on the head. I had a project a few years ago with an ophthalmology practice. It was 5 offices open 6 days a week in New York City. They had 5 offices open 6 days a week, and they owned some of the buildings where they were, and they were claiming that they were a mom and pop shop. And I went back to them and I kind of said, like, unless you're trading chickens for eye exams, how are you a mom and pop shop? But at the end of the day, they had a very serious problem. And I said, look, we got to get a handle on this. My recommendation is that we do a statistical sample for each office, because you got to know, like, who's the doc that's causing your problem. If you just do a sampling of the practice, you're never going to know who the doc is that's got the problem. And at the end of the day, they came back and they said, well, we didn't budget for this. And I said, look, the only person I know that ever budgeted for their criminal behavior was John Gotti, right? I mean, nobody is putting money aside for their criminal defense fund, generally speaking, but nobody does that. Oh, you? Yeah, no doubt. You mostly had a quarter sewn in your bra when you were a kid in case you got locked up. You had a quarter to call the police from the lockup.
That's right. That's right. No,
But that's
listen.
that's an important part, right? So Jordan, I mean, I got you have that. How do people just know that they've got to do it? You got to put money aside, and you got to know
Well,
you're doing this so that
what's even to your point, what's even crazier is now it's actually way less expensive than it was 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, we didn't have the data analytics and we didn't have, so everybody remembers this old 10 chart audit that everybody would do. And that was the gold standard. And you would look at what they build and you'd look at their documentation. Well, now with technology, you can run 100% of their data, still go look at their documentation and still come out way less expensive than it was 10 years ago, back when it was, whatever, $500 a chart or whatever. It doesn't make much sense to me now.
Yeah. No, absolutely spot on. All right. So I think we have hit all of the high points of everything that we wanted to hit today. We hit the HR bill for the COVID 19 2021 and beyond. We got an opportunity. The last thing that I think we need to talk about, Eric, wrap us up. Pfizer. What happened in the Pfizer case?
Pfizer. So, we talked about this when it first, came out. Pfizer, so generally speaking, the OIG has opined. There have been civil settlements on this. The courts have ruled on this, that the use of coupons and copay assistance plans, not charity, because we're talking about different things, coupon and copay assistance plans that come through manufacturers are considered a violation of the anti-kickback statute as an inducement to the patient. There are studies that are out there. Some of them come from Kaiser Family Foundation and some others, which talk about driving costs up by using these coupon and copay cards, even in the commercial space, because when there is a generic alternative or generic equivalent, that when you use these coupon and copay cards, a patient may have a zero copay, where on a generic, for example, they may have a $20 copay. But if someone can get the name brand drug with this coupon or the copay card, they have a zero copay. So there's sort of this steering issue. Pfizer had an orphan drug, very small percentage of people for a condition that mostly afflicted African-American population of people in the Medicare space. Pfizer sought to get the anti-kickback violation statute piece of the, how it affected it to be, negated. They sued HHS. It was in Southern District of New York. Federal court said, no, this is a violation. The statute stood. Pfizer appealed, as I anticipated that they would. And the court just ruled recently, Second Circuit ruled, no, Pfizer, no bueno, this is still a violation of the anti-kickback statute. Whether Pfizer seeks to appeal through, the en banc, meaning the full court on the Second Circuit, or if they look to move this up to the Supreme Court, which I'm going to guess, not being a lawyer, not really understanding a lot of this, but I would guess Supreme Court's going to probably say, like, we're not dealing with this. So many other courts have already opined on this. There's a lot of case law. There's been a lot of opinions on this.
Yeah. I could see them filing an amicus brief to possibly petition the Supreme Court to hear it when they come back in session. I agree with you. From everything that I was able to read on it from yesterday and today, I would be absolutely shocked if the Supreme Court agreed to hear it. And if they did, which I don't know why they would, but if they did, I don't think that they would have any different interpretation than, this isn't like in the Ruan case where the judge refused to give, jury instructions about the subjective, knowledge, the subjective knowledge of writing a prescription. He only gave the objective portion. So there was failure on the part of the judge in the circuit court, right? So the Supreme Court looks at that and they say the questions before us are, I think
Right.
in a situation like this, they're going to look at it and they're going to say, the anti-kickback statute is crystal clear. This is not a case that needs to rise to the level of the Supreme Court. We're going to decline it. I just don't see it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think part of this metric is also, and if I recall correctly, I don't know if I could reread it, but if I recall correctly, part of what Pfizer was sort of talking about was, like, is this discriminatory in nature? like are you discriminating against this class of people because this is an expensive orphan drug and what have you. But it's interesting in the sense that these challenges have come up previously. A lot of the challenges that come up when it comes to matters involving the coupons and the copays, it's always like, why can you do it in the commercial space but you can't do it in the government space? I was on the phone with a lawyer today who, I'm working on a project involving anti-kickback, and I said, healthcare is, one of the few segments of the economy in which referral fees are a prohibited practice because it's a regulated industry, and that's sort of the way it is. And, the days of being able to carve out a kickback or a coupon copay waiver on the commercial space, those days are becoming a little less because of things like the implication of ECRA on expansion, but also things like bringing in the Travel Act. And I had a whole conversation with this lawyer about the Travel Act. We used it in New Jersey, I think for the first time, on what was known as the Biodiagnostic Labs case, BLS, where, it basically, we were able to criminalize federally what was otherwise a state violation in which interstate commerce is affected. And so, you can see that, the industry with these coupons and these copays, you've got states that are having statutes that are prohibiting their use. You've got in a lot of the plans, you can use them, but it's not going to apply towards your deductible, right? You've got the maximizers, the accelerators, whatever they call. And it's just this constant landscape where the manufacturers are trying to do something, the PBMs come with something else. It's like, you come at me with a water gun, I'm coming at you with a water balloon. Right. And it just keeps going and going.
And I will tell you from my own personal experience, I really would like for the insurance companies to carve out the prescription drug portions, lower the premiums for major medical care, and then allow patients to use the free market to identify coupons, to use GoodRx, because I'm tired of the insurance company. You guys know the struggle that I went through, and I finally just said, you know what? It's $105 more for me to pay for it every 30 days out of my pocket. So it's another, $1,200, $1,300 a year for me to have the medication that I need. And yeah, fortunately, I can afford it, and there's so many who can't. But
Right.
if you took the insurance companies out of the pharmacy world and you just created a free, enterprise space where people could have options and they can negotiate it, and you stop giving them, these pharmaceutical companies, all of these renewals on their patents, let them all just expire, and then put it into the free market and let the
Right.
consumer have the last say in that. Go ahead. I'll let
So
you
that's
guys have the last word.
the issue is that the way the patent laws are written, a change in the package insert could trigger something like that. A drug that's one pill twice a day, they make an extended release, 2 pills once a day, the patent gets extended. But the closing thought is, number one, my dad actually, who's on a bunch of medications because he's elderly, he's actually gone and started using GoodRx for some of his prescription medications. He's got Medicare, he's got a supplement, he's paying thousands of dollars a year for his coverage, and he's still going to GoodRx and paying out of pocket because it's cheaper. My final thought is going to be, is Mark Cuban really so crazy about what he's trying to do with his, with his internet related? It's brilliant.
I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and you're seeing Amazon getting into it, but I don't know that anybody's going to be able to pull it off better than what Mark Cuban's going to be able to do. I think it's pure brilliance. And anybody who isn't aware of it, maybe Eric or Jordan or I or the three of us will put something together.
Let us know. Yeah, for sure. Cost Plus Pharmacy. That's Mark Cuban's pharmacy, and it's definitely disruptive in what's needed. So I agree.
Absolutely. All right. That's going to bring us to the end. We are 1 minute shy as opposed to going 1 minute over. We are 1 minute shy to the 1 hour mark. So on behalf of myself, Sean Weiss, Jordan Johnson, Eric Rubenstein, and Eric's twin, we want to say thank you all so much for hanging out with us for a little while. Remember, this is the original CCC. And until next time, take care.